Yeah, I think I'm going to just jump straight in there and actually demonstrate some vulnerability by saying that when I was born with a genetic neuromuscular disability, um,
Mhm.
and I've been a wheelchair user all of my life. And one thing that I talk about in the work that I do is the intersectionality between our different identities and characteristics. And so I talk about being or having a disability and being gay. And I think
Mm.
when I look back at my younger self, um, I don't think that those necessarily intersected very well, because a
Yeah.
lot of the stereotypes that people have about disabled people in society, and about sexuality of disabled people as well. So it's a bit of a heavy one to start off with, I'm afraid, Justice. But I
No,
thought,
it's
well,
great.
why not? Let's just dive straight in.
No, it's fantastic. I think I do have a follow up question with that, and I think for our listeners, there has been recently, I know in America, a conversation about terms that we use,
Mm.
disability versus people with disability. Can you help our listeners understand and grapple with kind of the conversation when they're trying to have this conversation? What are the terms that they should be looking out for, and how should they be looking to have this conversation?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot with my clients around the importance of language, using the right language, which language makes people feel included or excluded. When it comes to disability, I mean, certain, I suppose this is from my perspective, coming from the UK. We often talk about the medical model and the social model of disability,
Mhm.
and what the social model says, and this is kind of the preferred way of looking at things, is that people are disabled because of barriers that are created in society, not
Mm.
because of somebody's underlying um, condition or impairment. And so the preferred language in the UK around the social model of disability is to say disabled people, because it, the disability is created by those barriers. Um, but the jury really is out. I've done a kind of poll with my friends, and half of them prefer disabled people, half of them prefer person with disability. And really, the key thing here is to ask whoever you're talking to what their preferred language is. And this is not just about disability, it could be somebody's pronouns, it could be somebody's sexuality, it could be around race and ethnicity. It's always best to check in with them to see what they prefer, what their preferred language is.
One time for the people in the back. I totally agree with everything you just said. I get the question all the time: why don't black people just like black, or is it African American? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And there's a general census of, oh, most people like this, but it's the individual. What does that person prefer? And let's honor that person's what that person wants. So that's fantastic. So so well said. I love where we've jumped in right now because I think there are some real issues that really aren't talked about enough when it comes to number one, disability. But I want to get at intersectionality first. And you talked about something interesting, which is coinciding intersectionality as a person who has an intersectional identity, which we all have. But then how does a business look at intersectionality and what does that mean for that business?
The I suppose what I try and encourage my clients to do is, first of all, recognize that intersectionality. Um, it might sound a bit simple, but I don't think a lot of business leaders think about it enough.
Mhm.
And often, when a company is developing its diversity and inclusion strategy, um, and I spend most of my time helping clients develop their strategies, they think in a
Mhm.
very kind of siloed way. So they'll say, okay, right, we recognise that we have a gender imbalance at the board level, or there's a particular part of the organisation where we've got a gender imbalance, like technology or engineering, where there might be more men working in that department than women, for instance. So what they'll do is they'll say, okay, right now our focus is on, we're just going to focus on gender. Um, and then what I saw a few years ago after the murder of George Floyd over in the States is that organizations were like, okay, right, now we need to respond to the Black Lives Matter movement, and we need to talk about developing an anti-racism strategy for the organization. And they think in a very kind of hierarchical and siloed way, and they don't really think about the intersectional nature of our existence, and how it and how we need to have like a joined up uh, plan or strategy when it comes to creating more respectful and fairer work environments.
Exactly. I think what you're saying really hits home with me because I think some of the work that we've done is just that, right? When you look, it's amazing when you start looking at intersectionality, some of the insights that can really be drawn. That when you look at, let's say, turnover of women, and
Mm,
then you lay intersectionality on top of that, or you start getting a more complex view of what that is, you may actually find even though women are leaving, the women who are leaving have a very interesting intersectionality about them that maybe it's black women, maybe it's women with disabilities, maybe it's women who identify uh, in a certain way. Like, but those women tend to be turning over even more than women.
yeah,
And when you start getting intersectionality, I think to your point about strategy, right? All of a sudden the strategy changes because you've informed what you took as a very siloed approach. So I love that comment. I think it's so
yeah.
applicable.
And
Uh,
it's an inefficient way of working as well. I've worked in organizations where they've developed a career development program to get women into senior leadership positions. And then a few months down the line, they then develop another career development program for um, people from an ethnic minority background. And I've had those conversations with my colleagues who are from an ethnic minority background where they've said, which program do I join? I'm a woman. Do I join the program for women, or do I join the program for people of an ethnic minority background, or can I join both? And I'm sat there thinking, why on earth are we doing this? Like, why don't we just have like one program which is like inclusive talent development? You know
yeah.
and surely that's a much more efficient and effective way of working.
Yeah. I do think and it is somewhat dismissive of that intersectional experience of, in that example, like women of color. I've talked to a couple of colleagues recently about that, and they have told the same example. And they basically said, I always join the people of color group.
Mm,
And there's this imbalance where they feel like then the women's issues that get talked about are usually disproportionately those that are faced by white women,
yes.
which can be those faced by all women, but it misses a huge demographic, and it leads to a group of employees at your company not feeling seen,
Yeah.
not feeling like their needs are being taken care of.
Absolutely. I would agree with that.
Fantastic. Well, I'm gonna transition back to the first part of that question, which is disability. It's something that no one talks about. And let me ask first: do you prefer disability when we talk about in this conversation, or what term would you prefer when we have this conversation?
Yeah, disability is totally fine with me.
Okay, fantastic. So, when we talk about disability, it's not usually the first thing DEI professionals tackle, right? And we talked about it being siloed kind of at the beginning. But I'd like to get more in depth from your perspective. What's lacking in the field of D&I when it comes to disability, and what steps do we really need to take in order to move it forward?
I mean, this is a bit tongue in cheek. I think what is lacking is including disability in diversity plans or strategies that an
Mhm.
organization might be putting together. Um, we've got what, 7 billion people living in the world, and it's estimated that a billion have a disability. Within the UK, the government are estimating that 16% of working age adults have a disability. Um, and when I talk to my clients, they just don't have any actions in an action plan around disability inclusion. They are, I suppose, doing the bare minimum that's required of them by law, like in the UK, providing reasonable adjustments, which is detailed within our Equality Act. And I know in the states, obviously you've got similar legislation in place, but
Mhm.
um, it's I mean that's it. They're kind of scraping
Yeah.
by with the bare minimum, and they're not even doing that particularly well. So
It,
yeah,
Yeah, let's talk about that because I think that's such an important thing. What is the bare minimum, and what is actually going beyond that?
Yeah, so within the UK, I mean, in the Equality Act, we've got a duty to provide reasonable adjustments, which is a bit of a legal term. Um, I prefer to talk to my clients about workplace adjustments, and I I also like to help my clients think that workplace adjustments don't need to just be about disabled staff. That you can make
Yeah,
workplace adjustments for all of your staff. It could be flexibility for working parents. It could be people who maybe experience mental health challenges and it's difficult to commute to work on a busy train, which makes them feel particularly anxious. And you could have some flexibility about when people start or finish their working day. So that flexibility or those quote unquote reasonable adjustments can actually benefit many more people than just your disabled community within the business. So this is really about thinking outside the box. It's being a bit kind of creative, a bit
yeah,
innovative, and really thinking about how you can unleash the potential of people in your organization so that they can thrive.
yeah. I think that's fantastic. I think what I heard is there's a bare minimum of what the government tells you wherever you happen to be that says you need to do, and then there's a step beyond that, and really moving beyond what is just mandated is being creative in the deliverance of the tools and methodologies we're looking at to create that flexibility.
Yeah,
Would that be
absolutely.
kind of
Yeah, yeah.
fantastic? Okay, so that's great. So I think one of the next parts I want to talk about is your journey. We have a lot of listeners who are maybe looking to get into diversity of inclusion or have been doing it for years. But I think one of the very interesting conversations is how people get into this work and how it resonated with you. So I'd like to get to you like when did you know obviously this is something you wanted to do and how did you start making that transition into this field?
Yeah, I've had quite an interesting journey. So when I left university, I worked in technology. So I was an IT consultant for Accenture. I worked for an American healthcare technology company implementing software into hospitals. And then I worked at the BBC as a project manager, working on the BBC News website, BBC iPlayer, which is our TV on demand service, and
Gotcha.
accessibility projects. And I, I, I fell into diversity and inclusion um, kind of by accident, really. I used to work really closely with our chief operating officer. And
Okay.
he was concerned with the rest of the leadership team of the technology department at the BBC about the gender imbalance that we had in our department. So when I
Mm,
was there, only 14% of our workforce were women in the technology team,
wow.
compared to the rest of the BBC, which had a 50-50 gender split. So
Wow.
our department was out of balance. And I mean, we were in the same boat as Facebook and Google and Amazon in the in the engineering community. There is a gender imbalance across the industry. So to cut a long story short, they basically created a plan to get more women into tech, and they needed a project manager to run that plan. So that's where I volunteered and put my name forward. And then I quickly realized that I just really enjoyed working in this space. And I kind of joke that the BBC has a kind of a reorganization every fortnight, but I managed to move into the HR department and turn it into a full time job and look after other BBC divisions like all of the corporate function services and radio before heading back into the private sector. I went to work for Deloitte for a couple of years,
Mhm.
looking at diversity, within the Deloitte firm in the city. So that's been my journey.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and I think I'm going to step on a soapbox here. I think who you work with matters, especially in this field. There are a lot of people who uh, are fantastic and very well intentioned, but there is a markable difference between someone who has held a position, being in charge of diversity and inclusion, and those who have not. And who you work with matters. And I got to say, Toby, very impressive story. And I think for anybody listening, any of our listeners, doing the work is the best way to get better at doing the work. So I think this is fantastic. Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that.
you're welcome. You're welcome.